is World Communion Sunday, when we remember and celebrate that we do not journey the faith as individual Christians or even as a community called FPC Stamford. Rather, we are part of more than 2 billion Christians worldwide. Christians wherever your finger might land on that spinning globe. That is a lot of people gathering around God's table today. Today is also Peacemaking Sunday, when we reaffirm that working for peace lies at the very core of our being a disciple of Jesus Christ. As Jesus put it, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God. I've got to tell you, I wasn't feeling very like peacemaking as I read about the death of Zymir Perkins this week. Zymir was only 6 years old and was beaten to death by a broomstick in her mother's boyfriend's hands. His autopsy revealed several fractured ribs in different stages of beating, showing that he had suffered a sickening sequence of bone-breaking blows over a number of months. Sadly, Zymir is only one of more than 1,500 children who die from abuse each year in our nation. And what really gets my non-peacemaking blood going is that far too many of those abusers are also breaking the bread and pouring the cup today. And so I'm right there with the apostles this week when Jesus tells them they got to forgive 70 times 7. And they implore Jesus, brother, you're going to have to increase my faith if I'm going to get there. Me too. The band of disciples give me hope, though. Jesus calls this small group to follow. He invests enormous time and energy in mentoring them. And over again, they prove that they are less than perfect disciples. They misunderstand Jesus. They disobey him. They get it wrong over and over again. And yet here's Jesus telling them that they are to be full of forgiveness. To forgive those who have wronged them time and time and time again. Is there a more difficult thing than to forgive not once but dozens of times? What on earth, from what Jesus has seen of these disciples in actions, gives him the impression that they will be able to obey him in this demand for them to be forgivers? Why set himself up for yet another disappointment from these disciples? Maybe that's why the disciples begged Jesus, increase our faith. If you're going to ask great things of us, Jesus, then you will surely have to give us a faith booster shot. You know us. What are you thinking? Now, Jesus may surprise you with his reply. You have faith enough to be faithful. You don't need a mega portion to be faithful as one of my disciples. If you just a small amount of faith, a small amount of faith is a tiny mustard seed, then that's enough. Increase our faith. Sometimes I think we feign humility, complaining about all the virtues we lack because we believe that we have all that we need would require us to step up and make good on our faith. Forgive 70 times 7, commands Jesus. And we reply, look, Jesus, I'm no saint. I try to do what little good I can, but I'm really not all that religious, and you know me. And Jesus replies, I have given you all that you need to follow me. Now get on with it. Jesus blows off their complaint that they need more faith in order to live a faithful life as discipleship. He also dismisses their notion that he's the kind of wave a magic wand type guy. You know, a mustard seed is really tiny. 1/20th of an inch tiny. In rebuffing the disciples' request, Jesus underscores the notion that faith doesn't have to be huge to have an impact. It doesn't have to make the headline news to make a difference. Jesus understands the significance of small steps. We already have enough faith to do what God needs us to do. We don't need supersized faith. Seed-sized faith will do just fine, because there is big power in mustard seed faith. We live in a world being bloodied by violence every day. UNICEF announced today that 96 children have been killed and 223 injured in Aleppo since Friday. That's 2 days. Syria and Russia have dropped more than 1,700 bombs on that city this week. Now, it is easy to feel overwhelmed by the challenge of working for peace and reconciliation. We don't know how to respond to war in Syria, let alone gun violence in our own city, or drug wars along the border with Mexico, or terrorism near and far. Where do we begin? What can we possibly do? The hostilities in the world can make us want to run for cover or bury our heads in the sand, even though we know that such responses are ultimately unfaithful. Peacemaking for us Christians is not an elective course offering. It's core curriculum. Paul reminds us that God has given us the ministry of reconciliation. And so, feeling overwhelmed, we cry, increase our faith. And Jesus says, you already have enough faith to do what needs to be done, my friends. The key to not being overwhelmed is to remember that we do have enough faith to be faithful. Faith enough to start in our own families, our schools, our communities. It would be difficult to find a more powerful image of Christian reconciliation than one that began 10 years ago today in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Remember that school shooting? And what the world saw there in a very small community was a group of Amish men and women who took a stand for forgiveness after a gunman slaughtered 5 young girls at the Nickel Mines schoolhouse. And what was most impressive about the Amish response to the murders was the way that these peace-loving Christians reached out, and even today continue to reach out with support for that gunman's widow and children, including providing financial support for her from donations that they received. Such exemplary acts of witness stir the imaginations of the larger world, wrote Greg Jones, a former dean of Duke Divinity School. He went on to say, we need our imaginations to be set on fire by stories that show that what we think is impossible or unrealistic is indeed possible, if we have the courage to cultivate habits of reconciliation. Habits of reconciliation. I like that. Small, seed-sized steps that can have an enormous impact. Just imagine for a moment if all of those billions of Christians around the world really practiced Christianity. Imagine if we as a congregation really practiced Christianity. Simply practice the faith we possess. Think how the world might be changed. G.K. Chesterton once observed that Christianity has not been tried and found wanting. It has been found difficult and not tried. As much as my innards fantasize about using a baseball bat for something other than hitting a baseball after reading about Zymir this week, as a follower of Jesus Christ, the work of reconciliation is my responsibility, as it is yours. It's right there in our job description, along with the ministries of comfort, service, encouragement, healing, lifting the falling, advocating for the oppressed, weeping with those who weep, listening to those who despair, the peaceful settling of disputes, overcoming of differences, and reestablishment of friendships. It's right in our job description. Now, it's a pretty safe bet, I dare say, that you and I won't attain the ranks of supersized faith, the realm of King and Tutu, Teresa and the Amish. But that's cool. It's all right. Because God has promised to compound our tiny seed-sized faithfulness. Our very best efforts may well be just a few tiny steps. Nothing spectacular in themselves. But when those tiny steps are combined with the seed-sized steps of other faithful people, there's no telling what might transpire. Remember, it only took 13 disciples to turn the world upside down. Let me give you one small seed-sized peacemaking step that each and every one of us absolutely have faith enough to be faithful. Conversation. Reconciliation begins when we look for reasonable solutions to problems through dialogue. Rockets and bullets may bring submission. They cannot bring healing solutions. They may end a war. They won't bring shalom. And so sit down with a Muslim neighbor or co-worker and hear about his story of life in the United States, especially during these few months of inflammatory rhetoric. Or have coffee with a difficult colleague and listen to what she says about her struggles at home. Invite an estranged relative to dinner and pay attention to what has been causing him pain. Reach out to one or two folks in this room who are different than yourself and let them know you'd really like to get to know them better. Find someone you don't know this morning and ask them to come to coffee hour with you and chat. Join the soup kitchen or Pacific House cooking teams and spend time having conversation with the men and women who would go hungry without those meals. Begin to see the world through their eyes. Sign up to be part of creative learning and learn from young children what it's like to live poor and marginalized amid the rampant affluence of Gold Coast, Connecticut. Speak to Martha Taylor Nobile about how you might get involved with our Refugee Resettlement Committee in supporting the Nokta family as they begin their new life in our country. None of these things will transform the world overnight. But they surely can transform your world and the world of your neighbor. They can be part of a rumble of reconciliation that will build in strength as more and more people practice tiny acts of faith and obedience. A rumble that with God's compounding can change our world. Oh, but Jesus, increase our faith. No need, he says. You already have faith enough to be faithful. So get on with it. Amen.
Will you join me?